When I was 3 months pregnant, I walked in on my husband and his sister-in-law being intimate in the study. Seeing me come in, Clara shyly buried her face in my husband's chest. James gently smoothed Clara's clothes and took her hand. Your sister-in-law is already 3 months pregnant. When the child is born, I will hand this child to you to raise together. This is my eldest son, so I can't let him suffer. As long as you are obedient, you will always be my wife. I coldly watched as my husband carefully helped Clara away, a sardonic smile playing on my lips. After maintaining a gentle and considerate facade for so long, they really treated me like a pushover. If only James had bothered to inquire, he would have known that Eleanor has never been one to be taken advantage of. Since that day I caught my husband and his sister-in-law in their act, the two of them no longer bothered to hide it at home. My mother-in-law, Margaret, took my hand, offering a heartfelt consolation. Good child, your sister-in-law has had a hard life. 3 months after she married into our family, your elder brother died in an accident. Over the years, she has never thought of abandoning us orphans, and has always helped me take care of the family and raise my younger son. James is a grateful child and always remembers Clara's kindness. As his wife, you should be of the same mind with him in repaying her. My expression was indifferent and I casually asked, then sister-in-law shouldn't sleep in a separate room either. Why not sleep between me and my husband? The three of us can live together happily. Wouldn't that be better? Margaret's face instantly turned cold. You're supposed to be from a family of scholars, raised in a respectable family, aren't you? Your grandfather was a literary giant, but how could he raise a granddaughter who speaks such vulgar words? I looked shocked. Oh dear, maybe it's because I've been around vulgar people for too long. My moral standards have unconsciously been lowered. What? Is it vulgar and uncultured for me to say it casually? Then is it considered repaying kindness for your younger son and his sister-in-law to repay by sleeping together? I wonder if my early deceased brother would be so angry that his coffin lid would not stay down if he saw his wife sleeping with his younger brother. Margaret wasn't as quick-witted as I was, and she was speechless after I rebutted her a few times. Clara rushed in when the atmosphere became tense. With a heavy thump, she knelt on the ground. Mom, it's all my fault. Please don't blame Eleanor. It's me who is shameless, lusting after what doesn't belong to me. After pathetically taking all the blame, Clara knelt beside Margaret, weeping miserably. Margaret's face softened with pity. Clara continued with a wronged voice. Mom, it's my fault, this child. Clara reached out to lightly caress her belly. This child is not meant to be with James, and it wouldn't be good for the child if he was born. It would be better for him to die with his useless mother. Upon hearing this, Margaret immediately latched onto the crucial point. It's a son? It shouldn't be wrong. Since I got pregnant, I have been craving sour things. James said the things that were too sour for him were just right for me. Margaret's eyes lit up, and she quickly helped Clara up from the ground. Good child, you have been with our family for so long. I have long regarded you as my own daughter. Our family has supported each other, going through thick and thin. You and James were meant to be together. If it wasn't for someone who interfered, we would have been a family properly again long ago. As she said this, she slanted a glance at me. This statement made me laugh. That's great. Mother and sister-in-law have such a deep bond and have gone through so much together. It's really touching. But wasn't I the one who interfered? If I remember correctly, James pursued me relentlessly in college. My family didn't agree to my marrying into his family, but he knelt before my grandfather, repeatedly assuring him that he would be loyal to me and treat me well for the rest of my life. That's why my grandfather finally relented. I was a bit agitated, and the teacup in my hand wobbled, spilling some tea onto my hand. The fair skin on the back of my hand instantly turned red. I gently placed the teacup down, seemingly not feeling the pain, and casually used a tissue to wipe away the tea. Mother ran back and forth to my parents' house for 3 months to help James marry me. When you and your son begged my family to agree to the marriage, why didn't you mention that your son and his widowed sister-in-law were deeply in love? If you had said a word, I wouldn't have been forced to become the interferer or third party that you call me. I, Eleanor, am not a woman who cannot live without a man. The last sentence was directed at Clara. Perhaps the contempt in my eyes stung her. Clara immediately started crying aggrievedly. I was about to leave the hall when I saw James rush in from the entrance, stomping towards me. Why do you have to go against my mother? As a mother, she feels sorry for her eldest son's early death and feels grateful towards your sister-in-law. It's only natural that she might be a bit biased. Why do you have to argue with her? I said from the beginning that I wouldn't marry anyone else besides you. Can't you tolerate Clara, who is such a pitiful person? Looking at the man I once loved, now having such a fickle face, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. James, I've been with you from school uniform to wedding dress, for a full 7 years. You never once mentioned your relationship with my sister-in-law. You relied on my family's connections to get your current job, and spent my money to smooth your relationships. Now that you've gained a stable foothold, you dare to bring up your relationship with your sister-in-law. Dare you say these words outside? James coldly looked at me. All right. I thought I was marrying a gentle and gracious lady from a wealthy family, but I didn't expect you to be just as harsh. You have acted so well all these years, so it turns out that you, just like your family, look down on my poverty. I scoffed. I seriously wonder how you even got into our university. I'm talking about one thing, and you talk about something completely unrelated. Is your brain waterlogged? Or do you think I'm easy to fool? These words completely enraged James. He clenched his fists, as if restraining the urge to lash out. I don't want to argue with a shrew like you. That's the situation in our house right now. Whether you accept it or not, you have to. Your father is at a crucial time in his career, and a scandal involving you, his only daughter, will certainly affect his prospects. Besides, with your father being such a high official, does he have no secrets? His political enemies are all watching him. You'd better get along with your sister-in-law. Once your father's transfer is settled, then we can talk about this matter properly. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. He just wanted to enjoy the blessings of having 2 wives. But what he said was true. Although I was clear about my father's character, it was possible that someone might be scheming. James dared to threaten me like this, so it was possible that he had something to hold over me. Look at your greedy face. The Qing dynasty is long gone. Still dreaming of having 3 wives and 4 concubines, huh? Ignoring the trio's pale faces, I pushed him aside and went straight back to my room, thinking about what to do next. With my family's position, my divorce would surely be heavily reported, and it would be the Min family that would lose face. Moreover, my family was not peaceful, with many branches and smaller branches. I didn't sign a prenuptial agreement when I got married. My assets have multiplied several times over in 3 years. I don't want to share half of my property with that gold-digging family. But I have now caught James's weakness but have no substantial evidence, so I can't make him leave without any of my property. Originally, I planned to surprise him since I was 3 months pregnant. Never would I have imagined that I would get such a big slap in the face. This thoroughly woke me up. That night, I locked the door to the master bedroom, and James didn't even come to knock. I guessed he must have gone to Clara's room. At midnight, I went downstairs for a glass of water, but I heard noises coming from the study. I quietly walked to the door and listened to the conversation inside. James' cold voice came out. Mom, Clara, you have suffered, but this is a critical moment for me. Without the Min family's connections, I would probably be stuck in my current position for the next 10 years. Margaret's voice was a bit agitated. That bitch dares to show me her face? Does she even consider me her mother-in-law? James, aren't you on good terms with the leaders of the city? Why do you still need the Min family? They are all a bunch of people who look down on us. Clara sighed. Mom, why don't you understand? Our connections with those leaders should not be exposed. Besides, the Min family is still family now. Why shouldn't we use their connections? Not only should we use them, but we should use them to the fullest. All right, I don't understand your schemes, but we agreed that once James' transfer is over, we will deal with Eleanor. Once she dies, all her dowry will be mine. Mom, think long term. As long as James climbs high enough, there will be no shortage of money. From the crack in the door, I saw Clara put her arms around Margaret's shoulder, quietly comforting her. In half a year at most once. Eleanor is dead. Your grandson can openly stay by your side. Then wouldn't the four of us have money, power, and the good life we want? I listened with a cold face to those three shameless people plotting my murder. Once again, I was amazed by James' shamelessness. He relied on my money to maintain his decent lifestyle, used my father's influence to get into his current position, and begged my grandfather to help him rise through the ranks. He wanted all the benefits, and now that he has found a backer, he wants to kick me out. The most hateful part is that, because of their greed, they plan to murder me to take all of my assets. Margaret and Clara saw that I acted like nothing happened. They didn't mention James and Clara's affair again. They thought I had accepted their actions. In the past few days, they've been even more arrogant in front of me. Eleanor, your sister-in-law's skin hasn't been in good condition lately. I heard you own a beauty salon. Why don't you just give it to your sister-in-law? After marriage, Margaret always subtly asked me for money and things. I didn't lack money, and I didn't care about the petty sum she asked for. Anyway, they were small amounts or ordinary jewelry. I gave them as asked. Who knew that this would only increase their appetite? Especially now that they knew I caught James and Clara in the act, they even dared to ask for my most profitable salon. Logically, I don't lack a salon, and I wouldn't mind if my sister-in-law asked for some assets. However, Clara suddenly looked flustered. I don't covet your assets. Margaret grabbed my hand. Good child, have some pity on your sister-in-law and give her the beauty salon. That way she will have a way to support herself. Even if outsiders find out, they would only praise your kindness and your family's excellent reputation. Did this family really think that they could bind me with the Min family? If I really give it, outsiders would only call me stupid. I withdrew my hand with a cold face. This beauty salon is membership-based. The members are all top socialites. Everyone's status is equivalent. Which wealthy family is sister-in-law from? My eyes stared straight at her. If I really gave it to you, everyone would be asking for a refund in less than 3 days. It took me 7 or 8 years to build up this business. I don't want to let others play with it for now. Margaret's face darkened. What's wrong with you? We are just ordinary people and you talk about social status. What are you trying to imply? Clara lowered her head, wiping away tears from time to time, looking heartbroken. I'm not trying to imply anything. I'm just stating the truth. You mother-in-law are overthinking. Sister-in-law is your daughter-in-law after all. Although I don't know which son's wife you consider her to be. But if you want someone to support themselves, the mother-in-law should come up with a way yourself instead of eyeing another daughter-in-law's purse. After saying that, I went straight out, ignoring the two people who were fuming with anger. Clara and Margaret were just simple housewives who never worked. I, on the other hand, was very busy. Originally, I had a team in charge of the maintenance of the villa and my daily life. Later, when I married James, Margaret and Clara moved into my villa. The original housekeeper team was dismissed by James, who said that Margaret and Clara were responsible for household matters. His purpose was to give a sense that we were living as a family, not used to having outsiders, and also to save me some money. Looking back now, wasn't his purpose to make it easier for him and Clara to have an affair? It's all because I was too focused on my career that, for 3 years, I didn't even notice anything. After leaving the house, I went straight to a private hospital. While it was still early, I decided to abort the child. It was the child's bad luck to be conceived into my womb. James and I were destined not to have a good ending. Even if the child was born, it wouldn't be able to grow up in a healthy family environment, so why should I let them suffer? The surgery was quickly completed. I told James that I was going on a business trip to discuss a collaboration. I then moved back to my grandfather's house. I told my grandfather everything that had happened recently. After hearing my words, my grandfather sat by the bed for a long time without saying a word. I pursed my lips and asked, "Grandfather, James is too good at acting. He's rotten to the core." I originally wanted to get a divorce, but when I thought about how I didn't have any evidence, and would have to give him a large sum of my assets, I didn't want to make things so easy for him. My grandfather looked at me and sighed after a long time. You never listened to advice back then. You've heard stories about poor scholars plotting against the young ladies of rich families before, haven't you? These past few years, I've had your father monitor James' movements. We've just found some clues recently, and then this happened to you. In the meantime, You should stay at home and recuperate. Leave the rest to your parents to handle. Before finding any substantial evidence, we can't startle the snake yet." I nodded in agreement. Although I could solve the issue on my own given enough time, it would be better if my family helped. I have always known since I was young that I had powerful support, so I lived unrestrained and never allowed myself to be wronged. Now that I'm grown up and have the ability myself, I can't be even more inclined to allow myself to be wronged. During my month of recovery at home, James acted like nothing had happened. He diligently sent me text messages and phone calls, as if nothing had happened between us with Clara. After my parents found out about my situation from my grandfather, they were both heartbroken by the loss of my first child and angry at James' inhumane behavior. "Eleanor, don't worry. Your father will not let James go. He wasn't a good person to begin with, but I didn't expect him to be so shameless, to not even spare his nominal sister-in-law. He has no sense of ethics. Yes, baby, rest and recover. Your mom will help you solve the rest. You won't lose a cent of your money. Don't worry." With the assurances from the three heads of my family, I began my peaceful recovery days at the old house. After completing my postpartum rest, I planned to return to the villa. At least until I had concrete evidence, I couldn't let that family see that anything was wrong. But I had to be wary of people who wanted me dead. "Eleanor, if you have nothing to do today, go with my mother and your sister-in-law to the hospital for a prenatal checkup." I was eating breakfast slowly when James, that shameless wretch, actually wanted me, his legitimate wife, to accompany his mistress for a checkup of his illegitimate child. "You really are shameless now," I said while glancing at him with contempt. He spread his hands, showing that he had nothing to lose and was going to act like a rogue. James had bet that in order to protect my father's career, I would tolerate him until I could threaten him. As long as I didn't mention divorce or cause any trouble, giving him time to plan my accidental death, he would naturally be able to treat me with impunity. Find a better private hospital. The future birth and postnatal recovery should all be done there. That way you won't have to change hospitals and stuff. James stared at me with a smile. "You're going to be using it in the future anyway. This time arrange it for your sister-in-law. It's like letting you familiarize yourself with the process beforehand." I was about to curse, but my mind turned quickly. "Okay, I'll take her." I slowly put down the bowl, wiped my mouth, and saw that the three opposite had breathed a sigh of relief. I sneered inwardly. Did they really think that they could control me with some non-existent dirt on my dad? If it wasn't for making James leave with nothing, I wouldn't bother to play along with these three people. "Someone will pick us up later to go to the Avery Hospital, the best private hospital in our city. They have a good reputation for confidentiality. Sister-in-law, please prepare your documents." When I said Avery, her eyes lit up. After all, you couldn't schedule an appointment with the doctors at that top private hospital if you didn't have a high social standing. The Min family spanned the military, government, and business sectors. Although we weren't on par with the old families in the capital, in our city, the Min family was the leader. Since they wanted to use the Min family's power, then don't blame me for being the mantis stalk the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. "Dr. Liu, this is my sister-in-law. She is pregnant with her first child at an older age. My mother-in-law is worried, so she urged me to find a good doctor to help with the checkup." I talked to Dr. Liu smoothly. She and my mother were longtime friends. After her divorce, she returned from abroad, and my mother helped her get a job at Avery. With an acquaintance, it was much easier to do many things. "Leave it to your Aunt Liu. I'll have my assistant take them for a checkup. You stay here and have a chat with me. You haven't come to see me in a long time, you little girl." Seeing me wink, Aunt Liu quickly reacted and went along with my act. After Clara and Margaret were taken for the checkup, there were only Dr. Liu and I left in the office. "Tell me, what's going on?" Dr. Liu's face grew serious when there were no outsiders. "That sister-in-law of yours, I looked at her previous checkup results. This is not her first pregnancy. This pregnancy is probably going to be the last for her. She has miscarried too many times in the past, which has severely hurt her body." I was also stunned upon hearing this. Wow, I have really overestimated James' morality. Does Dr. Liu mean that my sister-in-law had more than one miscarriage before? Yes. If you're not sure, I'll do a checkup for them later, and the results will tell us. But it's likely she has had at least 3 times. It was probably because her family wasn't well off in the beginning that the operations were done poorly, and then she didn't take care of herself afterwards. So this pregnancy was the result of years of recuperation. So James and Clara had been together long ago. The reason he pursued me was merely for the Min family's wealth, status, and power. I have been blind, unable to see if the person by my pillow was a human or a ghost. Although I was certain that the child was James, I had yet to obtain concrete evidence. Now that they had handed me the perfect opportunity, I would be utterly useless if I failed to seize it. After discussing it with Aunt Lou, we agreed that Clara would come for prenatal checkups every few months. Aunt Lou would help me obtain a biological sample from the baby based on the situation. Then I would only need to bring James' sample, and I could get the DNA test results in 3 hours. With that in hand, I would divorce him, and James wouldn't get a single penny from me. Perhaps because I took Clara to the best private hospital for prenatal checkups, James had become very attentive to me recently. He didn't even get angry when I snubbed him a few times. By now, I had completely given up on him, and the master bedroom was completely off limits to him. Ostensibly, he had moved to the guest room next to the master bedroom, but I had observed that James came out of Clara's room every morning, so where he was actually sleeping was obvious. One night, James returned home with an excited expression. He went straight to the dining room, picked me up while I was still eating, and spun me around. Seeing Clara's astonished expression, my hands, which had originally been pushing him away, went around his neck. "Husband, what's wrong today? Why are you so happy?" That husband was the first time I'd called him that since finding out about him and Clara. I clearly felt the person holding me stiffen for a moment, and then he held me even tighter. Today my father's secretary came to my office and gave me a big deal. It's a foreign trade order. If I can sign it smoothly, I'm sure my position will be promoted in the second half of the year. Wow, no wonder. I thought, why is he so happy? Turns out it's because he's on track for a promotion. My parents had just talked to me a few days ago about the next thing my father was going to do, which was to force James to reveal his true colors. After watching him for a few months, my father had only discovered that he had been embezzling and reselling state-owned resources, using substandard goods. But they hadn't found out about his higher-ups and backers. Also, it was vaguely felt that James might be involved in the black market. He had connections with several powerful mafia groups in the city. After receiving this information, my parents repeatedly advised me to remain calm. Involving the black market was no small matter, and they were afraid that James might do something reckless to me if he was cornered. "Eleanor, did you happen to mention this to my father when you went home last time? Otherwise, how would this deal have landed so well on my lap?" James put me down but still held my hand and asked, "Well, you mentioned that you had a chance for a promotion last time. I just said a word about it to my father when I got home." I replied without any guilty conscience. "Since my father has paved the way for you, you have to do your work seriously and avoid doing things that would ruin your own future." James happily nodded. This opportunity he would definitely seize. Not only would he be promoted, but he would also have tons of cash coming in. Clara's eyes turned red with anger, looking at our intimate couple act. She slammed her chopsticks on the table and turned to go back to her room. I looked at her, ignored her, and instead asked, "Have you eaten? You have a bad stomach, you must eat well." James glanced at his sister-in-law, who was already 5 months pregnant. He then saw my expectant eyes and eventually stayed at the dining table for the sake of the big deal. Margaret, who was worried about her grandson, ran to comfort Clara when she saw me taking care of her son. As soon as I entered the kitchen, my expression immediately turned to disgust. That dog of a man, if it wasn't that this was more than just a divorce now, I wouldn't tolerate him. My father was currently in charge of economic affairs. James' company was a state-owned enterprise, and import and export trade had always been the most profitable industry. State-owned enterprises were also envious of large-scale import and export trades. Ever since James gained a stable foothold in his company, he had been eagerly building his own connections and relationships. Taking the substandard products produced by outside private companies and replacing the high-quality products produced by the state-owned company was already considered a light crime. He had also been demanding kickbacks when discussing business, accepting bribes, and instructing the accounting department to misappropriate funds. Any of these crimes would be enough to put him behind bars for a decade. It would be impossible for him to do all this on his own, with just his title as a small sales department director, without someone supporting him from the shadows. Moreover, with James being labeled as the Min family's son-in-law, outsiders might think that the things he did were all instructed by my family. After getting the big deal, James has been very busy, ignoring even his beloved Clara. It was easier for me not to see him. Luckily, the test results from Aunt Lou were out. It proved that the child in Clara's belly was hers and James. The private detective I hired to follow James had also made some unexpected discoveries. I flipped through the photos in my hand. The content was quite exciting. When I got home, Margaret was not there. I don't know where she went to play. Only Clara was home. Eleanor. I wanted to pretend she didn't exist, but some people just like to walk into the line of fire. It seems like we haven't had a good talk these years. Clara suddenly wanted to talk to me. It certainly wasn't as simple as that, but thinking of the photos in my bag, I still sat down. Eleanor, I know that the anger in your heart hasn't subsided. In this life, James and I have wronged you. We both owe you a lot. I sneered. We're all seasoned foxes here. What's with this strange stories from a Chinese studio? So how does sister-in-law plan to repay me? It's natural to pay back what is owed, and you owe me more than just money. Clara's face changed. Oh, that's right, as James' true love, I think there are some things you should know. I pushed the photos in front of her, signaling her to look at them. That's impossible. James said that there wouldn't be anyone else. Clara's face turned ugly as she flipped through the photos in disbelief. The photos were full of pictures of James going in and out of hotels with different beautiful women. I previously thought that he was so in love with Clara, but in the end he was still having affairs behind her back? Men, well, they are all inherently like this, especially when they have money and a bit of power in their hands. He was sleeping with you and then pursued me for money and power. Why do you think that after he has all this, he would still be single-mindedly devoted to you, his nominal sister-in-law? If James really treated Clara as his true love, how could he introduce her as his widowed sister-in-law to everyone? Even if you change your identity to Margaret's goddaughter, or an orphan from a distant relative's family, wouldn't that be better than being a widowed sister-in-law? In the end, even if James hadn't managed to pursue me, he would have married some other woman. His and Clara's nominal identity could only be that of uncle and sister-in-law. Deep down, he despised her for being a divorced widow. After losing the filter for James, that two-faced man, many of the things he did could not stand scrutiny. I could see clearly, but that didn't mean that Clara, who was still immersed in the beautiful future he had woven for her, would be able to understand. What I needed to do now was to personally expose his lies. Once Clara was shaken, then James, who was in trouble on all sides, would certainly make mistakes in his busy state. Many things can only be seen clearly when you step out. I've stepped out. What about you, sister-in-law? I looked directly into her eyes with a smile, as if trying to see through the deepest thoughts in her heart. Since that day I talked to Clara, I had noticed a change in the atmosphere between her and James. Margaret was confused and couldn't understand her son's attitude. Later, the detectives I hired discovered that there were more people following James recently. After reporting to me, I thought about it and told him to pay attention to his safety. Just follow him as best as he could, don't expose his whereabouts and don't confront others. It seemed that my father's plan had also begun. This foreign trade deal was just a test used for fishing. What had been drawn out from James was a huge network of connections. Not only did it involve people within the system, but also all sorts of material suppliers and mafia forces. Corruption and involvement in the black market had always been the key targets of domestic crackdowns. Now that James had become like a middleman connecting these two groups, this was a good opportunity to root them out completely. Recently, Clara had been acting a bit mysteriously. Margaret was worried that something might happen to her grandson, and she was always urging me to help find her. I was too lazy to care. It wasn't my child anyway. The reason I had stirred up the relationship between James and Clara was just to see these two dogs fight each other. But I never expected Clara to be such a hidden love brain. Originally, I planned to go back to see my grandfather this day, and also find out how my father and his team were progressing with their operation. Just as I was about to leave, I received a call from Aunt Lou saying that Clara had miscarried and was sent to the hospital. I quickly took Margaret and rushed to the hospital. On the way, I received a message from the detective. She had gone to confront James' mistress today. Obviously, the other party was not a good-tempered person. The two women started arguing and then started fighting. In the end, the result was obvious. Clara, who was 6 months pregnant, was no match for the other woman. She fell and started bleeding on the spot. The woman panicked. She didn't look for an ambulance immediately. Instead, she called James, crying and being unable to explain what happened. It was the detective who witnessed what had happened who called 120. Fortunately, the doctors arrived in time. The adult's life was not in danger, but the boy in her belly was gone. When Margaret and I arrived at the hospital, James had a sullen face and was anxiously pacing back and forth outside the emergency room. He never imagined that Clara, who had always been obedient to him, would cause him such a big problem at this critical moment. "James, what's going on with you? Is that how you take care of your sister-in-law? She gave up so much for you. This might be her only child in this lifetime." While I was scolding him, I slapped him hard on the face. He seemed stunned by the slap, turning his head without reacting for a long time. "You're asking for death, Eleanor. Can't you speak nicely? How could you hit your husband?" Margaret saw that her most beloved son was being beaten, and she pushed me. "Mom!" I winked at the mother and son, signaling them to look at the reflective lenses around them. Margaret wasn't that sharp. She couldn't understand my hints at all. James reacted and stopped Margaret. He knelt down in front of her. "Mom, it's my fault. I didn't protect my sister-in-law well. You can scold me and hit me as much as you want." "What do you two mean?" Margaret asked in a low voice. She was completely confused. "Mom, James has been busy with his promotion recently. If a scandal breaks out, he will definitely be affected. Please pretend to be angry and hit him." Margaret looked at me hesitantly. Only after James urged her did she start acting. James simply did not protect his widowed sister-in-law. As for the child in the widowed sister-in-law's belly, and the woman who was fighting, all these had nothing to do with him. Margaret seemed to hit hard, but actually she didn't put much strength into it. The reporters around got the footage and left, thinking it was concrete evidence of the Min family's son-in-law having an affair. Who would have known it was just a miscarriage from the sister-in-law? As for James' sister-in-law, a nobody from a small town, who would be interested in her news? With my quick thinking, he escaped from the situation and was extremely grateful to me. When Clara woke up, it was already 2 days later. Due to her previous frequent miscarriages and the poor medical and recovery conditions when she was poor, her body had long been broken. 3 years ago, when James and I got married, he had money and used the Min family's connections to find many famous doctors to help her recover. That's how she managed to get pregnant with this child. Aunt Lou had said before that this was Clara's only child in her life. Her already broken body also had to endure the pain of pregnancy. She would be very weak after the child was born. Now, because of her momentary impulsive actions, not only was she half dead, but the child she could use to control James and his mother was gone. It was also a boy. When I went to the hospital to see her, I saw that her face was pale as paper, and her eyes were hollow like a lifeless doll. "Eleanor, do you think my end is very miserable?" A hoarse voice came from the hospital bed. I was calmly peeling an apple. "You did it on purpose, didn't you? You showed me those photos on purpose, and deliberately provoked me so that I would fight those hussies to the death." The knife in my hand paused. I looked at her, smiled, and continued to peel the apple. "Don't think that you're fine just because you have the Min family backing you. I know best how ruthless James' heart is. I've been with him through thick and thin for 10 years. Her eyes were bloodshot. "He said that once I got better, he would send me back to my hometown, huh?" I looked at her calmly. "Why bother? I originally thought you were a smart person, but it seems that you're just like that. Goodbye, sister-in-law." I placed the peeled apple on the bedside table and got up to leave the room. This was the last time we met. My revenge against Clara had also come to an end. Half a month later, news came that Clara had died in a car accident on her way back home. Margaret was a bit sad, but not that much. James looked very sad, but there was ice in his eyes. I drank one glass of warm water after another, but I still couldn't stop my body from trembling uncontrollably. James was too ruthless. A woman who had been with him since they were young, who had miscarried several times for him, who was willing to take care of him from behind, he killed her without any hesitation. The villa was much more spacious with one less person, and the only man was also rarely home. After Clara's funeral, I found it hard to face James. I found a reason and went back to the old house. Margaret was very happy. She had this big villa all to herself with money and freedom. Wasn't that the good life she had been dreaming of? James was busy making a profit from the foreign trade deal. He was frequently contacting his higher-ups and connections with the community forces. My father and his team attached great importance to this case, and even set up a special task force to investigate it. At my suggestion, Clara's case was also included in the investigation. Once relevant departments were linked, their every action was placed under the spotlight. Every move was being monitored. Some news I occasionally heard from my father made me shudder. I couldn't even imagine the high amounts of money involved. That handsome, refined male classmate from college had eventually become a hideous, fanged ghost. No, perhaps that was his true form. As my father and his team's movements for closing in became more and more obvious, James also seemed to start noticing something. He had been calling me frequently lately. "Eleanor, how have you been at your grandfather's house lately?" James' gentle voice was still the same over the phone. I became vigilant. "It's okay. It's just that grandfather is getting old and has some of the small health problems that old people have." "Is it serious? Do you need me to go see him?" "No need. Aren't you busy? Work is more important. I'm with grandfather. We have a doctor at home, so it's no problem." As soon as I heard that he wanted to go to the old house, I immediately became alarmed and quickly refused. Wow, the old house was just me and my grandfather now. If he, a grown man, came over and did something, we couldn't stop him. Also, my father had informed me that they were already closing in. Those community forces were creating a lot of commotion lately. Seemed that the people on both sides had noticed something. He told me that I had to be careful that James would do something desperate. "It's okay, I'm not busy. The busiest time is over. I still have time to visit grandfather. Don't worry, I'll go back to the old house soon." After saying that, he hung up without giving me a chance to refuse. This call made me panic. I had a feeling that something big was about to happen. In a slightly flustered manner, I called my father to explain the situation. "Eleanor, protect yourself and grandfather. James has been pushed into a corner. We just arrested his backer in the city, and he immediately got the news. His connection with those community forces is deeper than we had imagined. When our people went to arrest him, he escaped. He is going to the old house, nothing more than to use you to threaten me, but now this is no longer under my control. If he knows that I can't save him, you'll be in great danger. You must first calm him down. I'll send people over to rescue you immediately." After finishing the call with my father, I was even more panicked. This is really not good news. My grandfather was very calm. Afraid that the servants would be involved, he sent everyone away. The huge old house was now only occupied by the two of us, grandfather and granddaughter. I wanted my grandfather to leave first, but the old man refused. I had no choice but to accompany grandfather in drinking tea. When James arrived at the old house, what he saw was the grandfather and granddaughter calmly drinking tea. "Eleanor, I'm here." The man who had always paid great attention to his image now looked a bit disheveled. The suit he was wearing was wrinkled and dirty. "Would you like a cup of tea?" Grandfather looked at him and asked calmly. "If you don't drink it, you may not be able to drink such good tea in the future." I followed up with the words he feared the most. "Eleanor, I'm your husband. Soon you won't be. 2 months ago, I already filed for divorce with the court. You cheated on me during our marriage and had an illegitimate child. You have been living with Clara for many years. You have a de facto marriage, and you're also guilty of bigamy." James clenched his fists. Because his backer had been taken down and his crimes were exposed, he was already on the verge of exploding with anger. When he heard that what he thought was his last hope had long since been thrown away, he was about to collapse. Don't you care about our feelings after all these years? I can't afford your kind of feelings that are bent on taking my life. If you choose to surrender yourself now, you might get a lighter sentence. If you continue making mistakes, you'll be completely finished. James struggled for a moment. He couldn't tell if we were acting so calm because we were prepared, or if we were just trying to pretend to be calm. I saw that he was indeed fooled, and I couldn't help but admire that my grandfather was indeed an old fox, who could control people's hearts so well. As we were testing each other, time passed little by little. When everyone realized that there was movement of someone approaching, James suddenly went berserk. With a knife in one hand, he lunged towards me, trying to hold me hostage. I waved my hand and threw the whole cup of freshly brewed tea at his face. James was burned and in pain. The knife in his hand loosened. I took the opportunity to kick him. The police who came to arrest him seized the opportunity and immediately subdued him. With the crisis resolved, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was finally over. James' eager connections finally became his death warrant. All of the illegal property he had obtained was confiscated. Because the household expenses over the past few years were all paid from my account, and I hadn't received any money from James, I was not implicated. But a large amount of money was going in and out of an account under Margaret's name, but she was unaware of it. It was later found out that it was a card James had secretly obtained to store his ill-gotten gains. Clara's case was also solved. James had instructed someone to do it. His crime list added murder, and the court sentenced him to death. Margaret lost her son and money. She was all alone and helpless in the city and had no other choice but to go back to her hometown. But this time without Clara, this filial daughter-in-law, to take care of her. She was all alone and her old age was miserable. Because of this case, the Min family also took the opportunity to clean up a group of unruly branch families. After experiencing the pain of cutting out the rot, the Min family still stood strong.